It's time for another monthly recap of all of the books that I read. Let's talk about April's reads. If you're new to this channel, hello, I'm Leanne, and I am sometimes, not always, in a Beetle reading. On this channel, I talk about anything related to books, be it reading, my reviews, my recommendations, or some of my thoughts on book talk in general as well, and kind of just the entire culture around reading. If that sounds like the type of content you want to be seeing more of, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that I can keep giving you this amazing content. This month I ended up reading a lot more books than I had in the past few months, so I'm really excited to go into all of them, but I didn't just want to tell you which books I read. I did want to give you a bit more of an in-depth, detailed review of these books, and at the end of the day tell you whether it's worth reading or whether I would recommend that book to you. The first book that I read in April was called Learned by Heart by Emma Donoghue. This was a book that I picked up for my Roll for Read series, which I was doing on TikTok and I think on YouTube Shorts as well. Learned by Heart is a queer story that's actually based on two real people. So it's based on Rain and Lister. I believe Anne Lister is a very prominent lesbian, and I think she was dubbed the first modern lesbian. It's based on her letters with Rain, who was someone that she went to boarding school with when she was still a very young girl, and it seems to be their first queer relationship that they had, and so it really focuses on Rain and Lister exploring themselves and slowly falling in love with each other and having this first foray into a queer sapphic relationship as young girls. This book started off really strong and I felt like it had really good potential, and the reason I say that is because Rain is half Indian. This book is set in England and it's set in a boarding school. It's about the 1800s when this is happening. The British Empire is very much still a thing and is probably at its peak at this point in time, and so Rain actually moved to the UK from India. She was still very young when she moved, so she has a few memories of India. It turns out that her dad is British and her mom is Indian, and so she's kind of navigating this experience in the boarding school as a half Indian girl. So she very much looks Indian, she doesn't look British, and so there's very obvious racism and very obvious isolation that she has to go through because simply of her skin color or just where she's from. Again, especially because the East India Company is very big at this time. They have colonized India, and so there are a lot of complex relationships at play here. I thought it was really interesting because the book being from Rain's perspective, we got this really great insight into what her experience was as someone who was brown in a country that had colonized her home country. And so there was really great exploration of how she experienced this othering, how she experienced this isolation, this racism, and how people weren't very subtle about it, but also no one ever said it to her face. And as a kid, she's like 13 or 14 in the books, that obviously has an impact on you. So I felt like the focus on that in the beginning of the book was really great, and I think there was so much that could have been done there that didn't end up getting done, which is why I was disappointed with this book. For me, I had really wanted to see more of an exploration of her battling with what it is to be from a colonized country living in the colonizer's country. I can't obviously speak to this in the experience that she might have been having, but my family is Anglo-Indian, and so for us, we kind of grew up with a sense of otherness in school because we went to an Indian school. For me, there was a very clear othering where even though I looked like everyone else, and I am brown and I am Indian, because of my name and my religion and the way that I would dress and the way that I would talk, I was very obviously othered from a very young age. And so growing up, there was always this very difficult relationship because I had prided myself on being an Anglo-Indian and like having Western or like foreigner blood or whatever it is, right? There's like a sense of, because we live in a very westernized world, there's a sense of superiority of being Anglo-Indian and not being completely Indian in a sense. But as I grew up, and especially through education, but as I learned more, and when I moved to Canada too, there was a very real sense of, you know, that was a really weird thing to happen as a kid, and it isn't something that I should be proud of in a way. And not to say that I'm not proud of my heritage. I very much love my family and I very much love our traditions. There's just a sense of, you know, that superiority of thinking that I was better was just very misinformed and came from a very nasty place. And so I was really hoping for something like that with Rain, especially because Lister, who she does end up falling in love with, is white and British, right? I think I was just frustrated because while the story did focus on their relationship, the story at the end of the day was about Rain, and it was about, you know, who she was and who she became as she got to know Lister more. It wasn't a story about Lister. Like, she is one of the main characters, but the story follows Rain, and it follows how she changes or how she experiences herself kind of before and after Lister, right? And after she meets her. To me, to kind of leave out this really, really massive piece of what could have been this really great character development was just really disappointing. And I think it just frustrated me because it felt like there was so much more that could have been done with this book, but it wasn't. And I don't know much about the author because, again, I didn't pick up this book for the author or because I had heard so much about it. I picked it up because I was doing this challenge where I was trying to read more books and trying to read different books. And so I don't know this author's background. I don't know if this author is mixed race as well. I don't know if this author is just white. I don't know if this author would have been able to speak to this experience. And if that's the case, I just don't think that this author should have written the book from Rain's point of view while incorporating these pieces of racism. Because even through the book, it's like Rain has to experience, again, a ton of isolation and a ton of racism, but like, we never really truly explore how that makes her feel. Like, we have surface level experiences of her being like, oh, that sucks that they othered me. But I feel like the story lacked the actual impact of that on her, right? And on her personality and on her self-worth and on her being in a relationship. Because there's a point too in the book that I found really uncomfortable, and I was like, that's kind of weird. But they go to the circus or something, okay, and they have like, I think there's like a bearded lady who is an attraction there, and Rain kind of stands there for a second and she's like, oh my god, Lister, is this why you're into me? And I was like, you're a bearded lady. But she was like, because I'm such a spectacle or because I'm such a unique thing, is that why you're attracted to me? Are you attracted to me because I'm like exotic in a way, right? Because I'm like brown and I'm like brown skinned and you just don't find that here. Like, is that why you're attracted to me? And I was like, okay, yeah. I was like, Lister, you better say no. And she's like, yes. And because like initially Rain's kind of like, what the hell do you mean? Like, that's such a weird thing to say. Why would you say that? And Lister then tries to like explain herself in a way. And she's like, no, like, how could I not be attracted to you because you're so different? Like, you have something that no one else has. Of course I'm going to be into you and blah, 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 blah. And then Rain was like, oh, checks out. She's like, oh my god, thanks for liking me. And I was like, that's kind of weird. My boyfriend's white. If my boyfriend turned around and said that I'm dating you because you're exotic, I'd be like, we're done. I am breaking up with you. Like, that is such an awful thing to say, especially when you're a person of color who has most likely been told that before in, again, a really weird othering sense, right? So I don't know, it was just weird, and that sat really weird with me because I feel like there is almost no person of color that would sit there and be like, dang, that's such a compliment. Like, thank you for saying that you're dating me because I'm like exotic because you're white. Like, that's the weirdest thing in the world. That moment too, I don't know, I was like, this author has to be white, you know? Like, I don't know, that felt like a very uncomfortable moment. And to me, I was like, that that sits weird with me. Like, I really, really don't think that I would have experienced that in the same way that Rain did. And I really don't think that any brown person living in the UK while the British is like actively colonizing India would also be okay with that, you know? Like, that feels really weird. And so I really didn't like that, and that did not sit well with me. And so because of that, I just think that this book failed in characterizing Rain in a good and a fleshed out way. Like, I was very disappointed with a character. I was very disappointed with how it ended as well. It felt like the author was just like, oh, I'm running out of space, gotta end this book. You kind of saw the ending coming, but I was still just like disappointed in the way that it was wrapped up. It felt like there was no closure. I am totally okay with books that are like, they have endings that you can interpret however you feel, because it's a bit more of an open ending. This book did not feel like an open ending. It just felt like a bad ending. I just felt very at the end of the book. I was like, oh, okay, like that's it. I guess. My biggest issue with this book, was once they got physically intimate, that was all that the book focused on. And it was really weird because they were 14-year-old girls, okay? Like, I was listening to the audiobook and I got really uncomfortable at a point, and I was like, do I continue this book? Because it's not like it was like wildly explicit, but it was explicit. I don't know, like I was uncomfortable because I was like, okay, so they got together and now the only thing you can write about is their physical intimacy. You can't write about anything else. And it's not even like that intimacy lended to the emotional intimacy of their relationship. Their relationship just kind of stopped developing after that point. It was like they got together physically and then that was it. There was no more emotional development of these two characters. There was no more development of them once they actually got together, how they changed after they actually got together. None of that happened. It was just like, oh, let's just see how intimate they can be all the time. And it was, again, really uncomfortable because they were literal children. And then I think that paired with a lot of the other criticisms that I had about the book, I just do not think it was a good book. And again, I feel like it had a lot of potential. I feel like it started really well, but the characters at the end of the day were just pretty flat. They didn't really have much else to them. And I don't think it ended up being the kind of poignant story that this author was trying to make, you know? I feel like this author was trying to write this like really great book about this really great love story and like make it this tragic, you know, tragic gay romance. But it was just bad, you know? Like it just, I don't think it hit any of the points or any of the marks that the author was hoping to. So I was very disappointed with this book, and I would definitely not recommend it. The second book that I read in April was called The Sea Hides Its Dead by Megan Bontrager. I think that's how you say her name. Sorry if I butchered that. This was an advanced reader copy that I got off of NetGalley, so that was super exciting, but I did not read the synopsis correctly on this book because I did not know it was horror. And I remember reading the book and I was like, yo, that's a little violent. I was like, that feels a little scary. And I kept reading the book and I was like, this is creepy, like this is scary. And then I like read the synopsis again and I'm like, oh, it literally says cult horror, like right there, and I just glazed over it. This book follows a professor and kind of a bit of a ragtag team of researchers as they enter this stone monolith that came up out of nowhere in the middle of this one ocean or water body or whatever, and it seems to be linked to what is called the cult of the Leviathan, which is the cult that this professor has been studying for years and years and years. It's kind of his life work that he's done. He's a bit of a punching bag, I think, in the university and within his field as well, because he's like the only person who believes in this cult and everyone else is like, you're a little insane. So think like Milo Thatch from Atlantis, but we don't like him, so it's not Milo Thatch, but that's kind of how he's positioned in the book, where everyone makes fun of him, people don't take him seriously, but he's been spending his entire life doing this work and he's really proud of this work. It's pretty similar in like, there's this like cult idea or this like whole society idea, which is similar to what Milo has about Atlantis, and there's like this whole script, like it's Enochian script, which is I think what like the angels use or whatever. There's this whole script that he's like very well versed in and all this kind of stuff. And so this monolith is basically part of this cult. And so he's like, we have to go study it because it's definitely part of the cult. And so he pulls together a bit of a ragtag team, again, similar to Atlantis. And they have explorers who are like cave explorers. They have a journalist, a photographer, and they have obviously the professor. And then he also asks one of his students, who the book is from her point of view, Caroline, and he asks her to come along even though she's like his TA. Like she hasn't started her thesis or anything, so it's not like it's part of her education, but they're having an affair, and so he's like, you better come. And we find this out really early in the book, by the way. This is spoiler free. And so he asks her to come, and so she goes along with one of the other TAs who are there, and they end up traveling all the way to wherever this monolith is. They enter the monolith, and once they get in, they kind of explore a little bit, but then they find themselves trapped in there, and a series of trials basically begins to become part of the cult of the Leviathan. It focuses on whatever these people have to go through and the trials that they have to go through in order to become part of the cult. I really enjoyed it. Like, I really, really, really enjoyed it. So I would definitely recommend this book, and I know I'm coming in a bit early, but I'm just saying I would recommend this book. So even if you aren't a big fan of horror, or you're not sure if you're a fan of horror yet, give it a try when it does come out, because I really enjoyed this book. So I really ended up liking the characters in this book, which is usually the case, and usually why I like books is because of the characters. The main character, Caroline, she was a very, very interesting character, and I really, really enjoyed her arc and her development over the course of the book. It was very well done, and I just think it was really satisfying. So I really enjoyed her character, but I also enjoyed quite a few of the other like side characters. The professor is made to be very unlikable and definitely succeeds in that. Literally hated his guts. He was the worst character in the book. The reason why you dislike him is also very well done. He is, again, you find this out very early in the book, but he definitely has a bit of like a narcissistic personality, and I don't know, I felt like it was done really well. It felt realistic. It was like he didn't quite realize that he was the villain. And then again, I really enjoyed his development, because as you get further into the book, he kind of almost really steps into the role of being the villain, which I think is really interesting and again is really well done. And I think that his relationship with Caroline was also very interesting and very realistic, and I can definitely see that happening in like universities and that being a very common experience in a way. And like I said, I also liked quite a few of the side characters. There were definitely characters that were there to get killed off, you know what I mean? Like, you just know that they're there so that your main character survives longer, so that they can be the ones who are killed instead, which is fine. You gotta do that in horror, right? Like, you can't have your character die first, so that kind of sucks. There were definitely characters that you didn't really get to know because they were, you know, kind of brutally murdered very early in the book, so you don't really have time to get to know who they are. But I thought it was interesting because even though there were some characters that we didn't spend a lot of time with, we got quite a good look into their life and kind of their psyche in a way, because of the nature of the trials that they had to go through. And again, I want to keep this spoiler free, so I'm not going to tell you what those were, but the trials, they were very, very personalized. And so just simply through the trial and simply through knowing what their trial was, you get a really good understanding of who that character is. So I thought that that was really well done, and I thought that was really interesting. And again, it seemed like a very interesting way to get to know more about a character, even though they have very little like page time or like screen time, you know? So it still makes you feel like you knew them, but the author didn't have to spend all of this time on, you know, explaining their backstory to you and all this kind of stuff. It's very easily done through the trial itself, which again, I thought was really, really interesting. I will also say that I actually really enjoyed the horror in this book. A lot of times I feel like when people are trying to create a sense of fear or a sense of horror, a lot of it's done through, I don't want to say like cheap means, but it's kind of done through just straight up gross ways, you know, You know what I mean? When they're like, oh my god, this is a horror movie and now we're gonna have this person like assault a woman. And it's like, okay, is that the only way that you know how to create fear? Like, is that the only thing in your head that creates fear? Like, at all? Like understandable that that's a scary situation, but like if that's the only way that you can create an atmosphere of fear, I just feel like that's lazy writing, and you're just like using the actual real fears of women to try to create a sense of horror. You're just kind of exploiting people's very real fears and just using it while not even trying to create commentary or anything, which I think is the hallmark of a good horror movie or media, right? I really appreciated this horror specifically because it did not rely on that at all. It was very much created through the environment, through the atmosphere. Like, the atmosphere itself was creepy. And I was like, I was like reading the book, right? So it's like you're watching a movie and you're like waiting for some jump scare or something. Like, you're reading a book, there's no like jump scares per se. But I would like read this book and I would be waiting for something to jump out at me. You know what I mean? The type of tension and the type of fear that the author was able to create in this book was spectacular. Like, I was reading this a lot of times in the night and I swear to God, I'd be like, I saw that shadow move. Like, I'd be like, what's in this room with me? I was creeped out. I don't know, the descriptions of the horror, the descriptions of like some of the, you know, things that made the atmosphere creepy was really well done and was like really creepy. And it's just like, you know, when you're reading something and you can't stop the image from forming in your head, right? And I was just like, ugh, I don't want to think about that. I don't want that image in my head when it's like midnight and I have to go to bed and like wake up by myself to go to work. It was really well done. Like, there was genuinely a really good sense of fear and of horror and of discomfort. Like, I think it was done really, really, really well. And like I said, I wouldn't say I'm a fan of horror books. I enjoy psychological thrillers, and this is like in the vein of, you know, like, it's a psychological thriller / horror, but I really enjoyed this book and like very, very, very much enjoyed it. Like, this was the type of book that I was like sitting and thinking about it like 4 days later, a week later, 2 weeks later. Like, I was like, dang, it's like, that book was wild. And I will say that the ending too was very, very satisfying. I really like the way that the story concluded. I just feel like the way that the conclusion was brought about was very satisfying, and it made sense to the story. Because, like, I'm not saying satisfying as in like it was a happy ending or a sad ending or whatever it was. I just felt like the ending was very satisfying given the build-up that we had done throughout the book, and given the actual story and the characters and everything that they had gone through over the course of the book. I felt like the ending matched what I was being told the entire story. I felt like it was an appropriate ending for the book, and I don't know, like, I really enjoyed it. Like, there was a really, really good sense of closure after I finished the book. So it wasn't like I was sitting there going like, oh my god, like, they could have done this thing and they could have done that thing, and like, what even happened about that one thing that they talked about in the book. Everything felt like it wrapped up really well. I really liked the book overall. Highly, highly recommend. Again, even if you're not a fan of the horror genre, or like you haven't quite given it a chance yet and you think you'd be open to trying something, I would highly recommend this book. If you enjoyed Atlantis, I would highly recommend this book. I'm gonna confirm the release date and I'm gonna put it up here on the screen, but you should definitely get a copy of it when it comes out, because I'm pretty sure I'm gonna get a physical copy of this because I really enjoyed this book. So this next review is going to be a little short because there isn't really much to say about it. The third book that I read in April was called Plant Magic by Cassandra Eason. As the book says, this was about plant magic. It was a non-fiction book about spirituality specifically, and obviously specifically magic and anything to do with plants. And I think there were like 4 separate sections in the book. I forget what they are. As I've said in some of my previous videos, one of the things that I really wanted to do more was explore more about my spirituality, because I've just been having a hard time with it overall. Growing up Catholic and queer, I think, does that to you. So part of what I really wanted to do was try to learn more about like magic, because I feel like it's something that I'm drawn to. And so I wanted to learn more about it. I love gardening. I love the idea of like magic plants, because I feel like I've grown up with my parents, you know, loving plants and like having these really, really beautiful gardens. And to me, I've always loved interacting with plants, and I've always felt like there was a certain sense of magic that came from that interaction. And so I was really drawn to this book because, again, it was an advanced reader copy. I was like, heck yeah, like I'd love to review this book because I'm interested in plant magic, and I've already done quite a bit of research on it. It's something that I've built my garden around for this year. So, you know, there's things that I already know about it. So I was excited to see if this book could give me something new. And unfortunately, I was very disappointed with this book, like very disappointed. One of the biggest and strangest things about this book was the weird amount of times that Christianity was referenced in it that I thought was, I don't know, I just thought that was really interesting. But like, I specifically remember multiple times throughout the book being like, why is there an archangel mentioned? Like, there were all of these really weird references to like, oh, if you do this thing, then like you're going to be able to summon this archangel. And I'm like, I don't want to talk to an archangel, otherwise I would go to church. Like, what do you mean? So it's just like weird. I don't know, like that felt uncomfortable to me as someone who was specifically turning to this because I did not agree with Catholicism. To then like have Christianity still being a weird focal point of this book, I was like, that to me feels contradictory. But again, I think, actually, I'll say what I think the weirdest part about it. The author kind of assumed that I would have the same views as she did when it came to like incorporating Christianity into my practice. So I think that was maybe the weirdest part for me for this book overall. Was it felt like the entire time that I was reading this book, the author was almost being like, this is how you should practice. And if you don't practice this way, I literally have zero information for you. Everything about this book was so closely tied to the specific way that the author practiced their own magic, that it was like, if you weren't the type of person who would like make, you know, shapes over whatever you're trying to like do spell work over, then the stuff that the author was telling you wouldn't be applicable. If you weren't the type of person to like have these very elaborate chants or like spell work, then you wouldn't really be able to utilize anything that the author told you. If you didn't view your practice in the kind of exact same way that the author viewed her practice, you wouldn't be able to use any of the information that she gave you. So I feel like that was a recurring theme throughout the book, and that felt a little bit weird because a lot of times, or at least for me, the books that I've read, a lot of people have been much more flexible when they're writing about things, where they've made it very clear that you can take what resonates with you and you can leave what doesn't. And more in a sense of like, you know, if they're talking about one specific sort of spell that you can do, you know, they'd be like, here are all the different ways that you could do this. Here's how you could adapt this information that I'm giving you to match the way that you specifically practice or the way that you like or whatever feels good to you. And this book never mentioned that, which, yes, I can do the same thing, but it didn't feel like there was as much space for me to do that as there were in other books. I will also say that the references to Christianity, coupled with what felt like appropriation of other cultures, also left a very bad taste in my mouth. I specifically remember like pausing when I read New World in the book and her talking about like the practices that the New World had created, and I was like, huh? I was like, I didn't know we were still saying that out here. Like, what? Like, I haven't heard that in a hot minute, you know? And I was like, that kind of feels weird. Like, that felt uncomfortable, and I was like, okay. And then there was like mention again about like chakras or about like things that specifically came from like Hinduism and came from other religions, which also felt weird because it felt like she was appropriating that in a sense of, I don't know, it was like I was reading this and I was like, was this written by like a white woman who thinks that yoga is what white women invented and like she drinks turmeric chai tea, you know what I mean? I was like reading this book and I was like, who wrote this book? And I don't know, like it felt uncomfortable, I think, reading that. And again, it felt like appropriation because never in the book was it mentioned that she was like borrowing from different cultures, or, which again is also kind of weird, but like it never mentioned that, you know what I mean? Which again, I've read other books that have very clearly stated that, like, hey, I don't want to appropriate things, and like you need to understand that you can't use things like, you know, like you can't say you have a spirit animal or something, right? Like there are these things that are very clearly understood as appropriation, and a lot of other books have said that straight up and have said like, hey, you know, I'm not using these terms and I'm not going to tell you that you can do these things, because if you're not Indigenous or you're not from a very specific cultural background, you shouldn't be doing this because it is appropriation. And so this book not having that at all, and then her talking about like multiple things that made me feel uncomfortable, was like really interesting. It also felt like it was just like a bunch of listicles in a way. I don't know, like there were like pages on pages of literally like, it was like flower language, and it was almost like a Google or like a Wikipedia entry. Like it was just a whole list of every single flower that you could think of, and it was like, this is the language. And I was like, okay, but I can go Google that, you know what I mean? Like I don't need this book here for me to like reference this or something. And it felt very impersonal. Like it didn't feel like any of the information she was giving me was her own personal experience or had a touch of personality to it. It was literally just her like taking it off of Wikipedia and putting it in here. And I was like, okay, I don't know that I can feel a connection to this book, right? Like, I don't know if I can feel a connection to any of the things that you're teaching me, which I think is really important in a book about spirituality, right? So I think all of those things combined just didn't really sit well with me. I just didn't really like the book. I don't think that I got anything new from it, and I don't think I learned anything from it. I would have been pretty disappointed if I actually bought the book and then like got this. I don't know. I was pretty disappointed with the book. I would not recommend this one, but I will put a disclaimer here saying that I read the advanced reader copy, so I don't know if that's going to be the exact same thing that comes out when it's published, but from what I read, I did not like it, and I would not recommend it based on that. So the next book that I read in April was called The Miseducation of Caroline Bingley by Linz McLeod. This was also an advanced copy, and I actually got the audiobook version, so it was an advanced listening copy. It did come out though, I want to say May 5th, so it should be out, but I'm going to confirm the date and put it up here. But this book is basically a queer retelling of some of the characters from Pride and Prejudice. So it's from the point of view of Caroline Bingley, who was rejected by Mr. Darcy when he decided to pursue and marry Elizabeth Bennet instead, who are the main characters of Pride and Prejudice. The story directly follows Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet getting married, and it focuses, like I said, it's from the point of view of Caroline Bingley, who is staying at the Darcy's residence because she is friends with Georgiana Darcy, who is Mr. Darcy's younger sister. Caroline ends up seeing Darcy at one of these events, and she asks him why he was not attracted to her and why he went with Elizabeth instead of her, and he is very, very direct with her and tells her that she's basically unlikable and that she really would have to change every single thing about her in order for someone like him to be attracted to her. And so she decides to go back to Georgiana and asks her to become her tutor, basically, or like her dating coach. And so she's like, you help me become a more likable person so that I can get married and like find this husband that I've always been dreaming of. And through this, I forget what they call it. I think they call it like the Great Plan or something like that. But basically, as they're doing this, and as Georgiana is kind of teaching Caroline how to become a better person or how to become a more likable person, they find themselves getting drawn to each other and eventually falling in love. Who would have thought? This was such a good, just like feel good book, you know, like it was really easy to read. It was pretty short, and honestly it was just very refreshing, and I don't know, like it was so nice and light and like pretty unserious, so you just got to enjoy this really nice, cute, queer relationship developing. And I don't know, I think it was just done so well. The characters were really great. I really liked Caroline and Georgiana's dynamics. I feel like Georgiana definitely has more of like a darker vibe to her, in a sense of, you know, she's like a little bit more somber. She's not as emotionally forward as Caroline is. Georgiana has a bit more of like a reserved vibe to her, whereas Caroline is a bit more outgoing. She is a bit like brighter. She's very straightforward, but she's also very like prim and proper and kind of follows society's etiquette norms and things like that, which Georgiana tends to not follow as much. And in places where she feels like she can't follow those norms, she just doesn't go anyways, which is why she kind of tends to not really like social gatherings, and she doesn't really like being the center of attention, whereas Caroline loves that. She's like, hell yeah, make me the center of attention. She loves it so much, but she's just like a little too blunt and a little too straightforward, which is why a lot of people don't really like her that much. But I feel like because of that, they work together really well. And I think that the author really focused on how their personalities complement each other really well. Because what I really liked about this book and what I really liked about the relationship was they ended up taking away different things from each other, right? Like Georgiana learned to be more straightforward and learn to be more honest, and how that can actually be helpful to people at times. Like lying to them or telling them what they think they want to hear isn't always the best thing, and to that, always being brutally straightforward isn't always the best thing for people either. So there are times at which those little white lies are actually more helpful than telling someone a very direct truth, right? And so both of them kind of learn this from each other, right? And they have to learn how to balance this, and their relationship is really what helps them learn how to balance this. I also just really liked how their relationship actually developed. It's very obvious and very clear as to why they're really attracted to each other, and so you can really understand what pulls them in and what attracts them to each other, and it feels very realistic. Like, it makes sense, right? It's not like this was just created in order for this relationship to make sense. Not only was the development of their relationship really well done, but the intimacy and the use of their intimacy to further progress the relationship was also done really well. I liked that once they actually started getting physically intimate, it's not like their relationship stopped developing. They actually used the intimacy that they had built to continue developing the relationship. And from that point on, you see a different kind of vulnerability between them. You see a different kind of relationship between them, and they continue to grow after that. It's not like they stagnate after that point, right? Like, after a point at which they start physical intimacy, it's not like that is the peak of their relationship and there's nothing better from there. That's just one aspect of their relationship. They actually continue to develop from there, and they continue to learn hard lessons with each other from there, and it's part of their relationship, but it's not what their relationship was building up to. I will also say one of the things that really stood out to me and what I really enjoyed about this book was Caroline's queer awakening. I thought it was done really, really well, and it's not like there are real spoilers in this book because it's a romance book, you know they end up together, but one of the things about her queer awakening that I thought felt really realistic was this idea of like looking back on your life and then being like, oh, maybe I didn't just think she was a pretty girl. Like, maybe I was actually attracted to her, you know? Which I think is a very, very, very real experience of a lot of queer people. That, like, when you're a kid, you don't fully understand your own sexuality because a lot of times people don't talk to you about sexuality because they think it's something that's meant for adults. But, like, it ends up being the sense of, you know, you always knew all along that you were queer. You just didn't understand that either other people didn't feel that way and you were different. I really liked just that one little piece of the story that, again, just made it felt much more relatable, right? Like, there was a sense of this book just being a very real experience for people, and almost a sense of, like, connection, I think, over the years, that, like, even though centuries have passed between, you know, whenever the story is set and the time and date in which we're reading it, there's still a shared link of queerness and a shared experience of, like, looking back on your childhood and being like, ooh, oh, okay, like, I actually thought she was, like, pretty, like, I want to kiss her pretty, you know, which I think is just, again, it's very simple, but it adds that touch of authenticity that I think a lot of times you kind of miss out on some books. And again, especially with it being queer, I think it also struck a really nice balance between the realities of being queer and the joys of being queer. There seems to be this tendency to focus on the struggles struggles that a community goes through, be it a queer population, a racialized population, whatever it is. When you have a marginalized identity, a lot of times, especially authors, tend to focus on all of the bad things that happen to you when you're part of this community. And it's almost written in a sense of, like, oh, but we persevere, which is fine. It's just that, when you have this almost this clause, right, of like, oh, it's really worth living because no matter how much people actually despise us, we still keep existing. As someone who's part of that community reading that, it's just always disheartening because you're always like, oh, okay, like, I get it. Like, I know that people feel this way towards me, but I hate having to read it in every single book I pick up about characters that have this type of identity. I don't always just want to be reminded of what it is to be in the real world, right? So I really enjoy when books like this have that touch of authenticity of, here's an experience that really grounds the experience of a queer person. But it isn't necessarily an experience of, oh, you got called slurs, right? Like, there's an experience that you can relate to as a queer person, but it doesn't demean the queer identity, right? And there's still a sense of, oh, like, these people could never live free. Like, you could never have this open queer relationship, and that sucks, and that's hard. But that's not the focus of the book. The focus of the book is these two people and their relationship and how they're going to make it work. And I appreciated that. I liked that it was a very simple, straightforward queer romance without me having to just feel shitty at the end of the day, being like, oh, dang, like, yeah, they're probably gonna get like hate crimed or something, Like, it's nice not having to think about that sometimes and just getting to like enjoy a good romance book about people who are more similar to you, right? Like, I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very refreshing. I thought it was very, again, a very light, easy read that you can just kind of breeze right through. And yeah, if you haven't already guessed, I would highly recommend this book. I really enjoyed it. Again, I'll just put up the date that it released somewhere up here, but it is already out as I'm making this video. So when I post this video, it's definitely going to be out. You should definitely give it a chance, read it. It should hopefully be on Spotify or in your local library soon as well, but I would highly, highly recommend this book. Very much enjoyed it. The next book that I read in April was called Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I have been meaning to read a Brandon Sanderson book for a while. I feel like people have talked about his books a lot in the past few months. Like, it has become really, really, really popular. And so I have been really wanting to read Mistborn specifically for a while. It's just such a long wait time at my library. I am still waiting for it. And I put a hold on it like many months ago, so I am still waiting for that book, but I will get it eventually. I had heard about Tress of the Emerald Sea, and I'd heard about his secret projects that he was doing. I was under the impression that you would have to read his other books in order to read those and to like really enjoy them, but I realized that wasn't true, so I was like, let me give this a shot, and I'm so glad I did. Anyways, storyline of Tress of the Emerald Sea. So basically we follow this main character, Tress, who is in love with the son of the king, so the prince of the little island that she lives on. And when she finally feels like she has the courage to kind of tell him that she loves him, he ends up having to basically sail off of this island with his father and go find himself a wife and kind of have it be a bit more of like a political arrangement. And so Tress is obviously like heartbroken and she's like, oh no. And he's like, don't worry, like, I have a plan. I'm not gonna get married. Like, I'm gonna bore all of the princesses so that no one wants to marry me, and I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna find you, and like, I'll convince my dad or whatever it is. And basically he's like, I will not marry someone who isn't you. She's like, okay. And then he leaves. And months go by, and eventually the ship returns and the king comes back and he's like, here's my son, and it isn't the person that she was in love with. And she was like, this is literally not, like, this is not your kid. Like, I don't know who this man is. And he's like, oh, by the way, like, I sent my kid to this like midnight sorceress who everyone is terrified of, but like, I adopted this dude on the way. And you're like, okay. But anyway, so Tress is like, what do you mean you just left him? And so she decides to basically go find him and to rescue him and to bring him back. To do that, she has to leave the island, which people are kind of forbidden from leaving the island because Otherwise, everyone would leave the island because there isn't much to do there. So she has to find her way off of the island. She ends up being part of a ship that like gets attacked while they're on the sea. And then she moves over to this other ship, and then that's where she stays for the rest of the story. And it's basically her story of like going on this adventure to find this person that she's in love with and bring him back. I adored this book. Literally adored this book. It was such a good read. And I did listen to the audiobook version of it. Oh my god, highly recommend. I feel like I would have enjoyed it anyways, but I don't think I would have enjoyed the book as much as I did if I hadn't listened to the audiobook version of it. The narrator, Michael Kramer, is so good. Like, he is so good. He is so entertaining. The amount of like emotion that he can portray in just like a few words is mind-blowing. Like, I love his narration style. The novel is very funny. It's very like unserious, and it is so well done. Like, he portrays that so well. And there are like a lot of points in the book where there are these like exclamations of things, or there's like this very snarky humor, and he captures it perfectly. Like, it is done so well. I have to say, like, I absolutely adored listening to his books, and so I will highly recommend that if you want to read this book and you haven't read any Brandon Sanderson yet, listen to the audiobook. It is so much better. Like, it is such an experience unto itself to just like listen to the audiobook version of it. So good. It had me entertained, guys. Like, I was cackling, giggling, kicking my feet. My boyfriend was like, are you good? But it was so good. I really enjoyed it. I don't even know where to start with what I liked about this book, but obviously the characters are brilliant in this book. I love Tress so much. She is such a good character. Kind of the whole point of her character and of the story is that she subverts a lot of tropes that you usually see in these types of fantasy adventure novels, right? Like, and sometimes it's just like the littlest of tropes, you know? Like, they'll be like, oh, you know, she didn't jump to a conclusion. She did what very few protagonists do. She waited. And it's just like, oh yeah, you know, I guess you're right. Like, that doesn't really happen a lot in books. It was that style of humor. It was very like snarky, very witty, sarcastic humor that I thought was just really well done. I don't know why I really enjoyed it. Tress as a character, she's so good. I really enjoyed her being like the protagonist of the story. There was something very likable about her. There was something very relatable about her. She is, you know, just this person who's put in these situations where she's kind of like, I wouldn't say forced to make decisions, but she's forced to make like strong decisions, but she chooses to be very like level-headed and very sensible about these things. And I don't know, like it is very refreshing to read that, right? A lot of times you're reading these books about like people who are thrust into these positions of, you know, decision making, of leadership, of making these like really wild decisions that no one else has made, and they seem to do it like very carelessly in a sense, whereas like Tress was very much like, ooh, let me do some investigation work, or like, oh, let me sit on that, let me think about that, like, oh, there's a reason why people haven't done this before, and I need to know what that reason is before I decide to go against it or something. It felt very refreshing in that sense, and it was great because it felt like you really got to understand who Tress was through those moments of her, you know, trying to think through things more rationally, or trying to make decisions that didn't just benefit her but benefited everyone around her as well. I also really liked her character development. Like, at the end of the day, this book is about Tress and about what she goes through in order to get from, you know, her island to the Midnight Sorceress and like rescue the person that she loves. Her development throughout the book is great. There's a sense of going in as one person and coming out as a completely different person and having to find yourself through these adventures. And I just think it was done really well. Like, I really enjoyed seeing who Tress became. But at the end of the day, she just becomes a different version of Tress. You know what I mean? Like, she's still her. At her core, she's still the same person. But there are like these traits or these behaviors that she's now picked up that she wouldn't have if she didn't go on this adventure, right? And so I really liked that too, because I really like the sense of, you can't always change a person. Like, you can't change and become a completely different person. You can just become a different version of who you were when you left on this adventure, right? Like, you can never become a completely different person with a completely different thought process, right? So I really, really appreciated that. And again, I just think it felt really relatable in a sense, and it felt very realistic while still being set on this very fantastical world. So I really, really enjoyed that. I will also say that simply the writing of the book was really well done. There were just like these little quotes that you'd get throughout the book that were actually such really, really beautiful quotes. Like, there were times that like it would literally just come out of nowhere and I'd be like, oh, like, wait a second, that's such a nice like emotion, you know, like, that's such a nice feeling, that's such a nice thought for you to say. I really like the writing style. It was absolutely up my alley. Like I said, very unserious. It really focused on like subverting these heroine tropes that you usually find in a lot of fantasy adventure books. And I think at the end of the day, I just really loved the focus on Tress as a character as opposed to Tress on an adventure going to find the man that she loved, and the book at the end of the day being about her reuniting with him. It was more of a book about her going on this adventure to find herself that happens because she has to go find the person that she's in love with. I will also say the world building was really good. Like I said, this was my first Brandon Sanderson novel, so I had no concept and no background of like what the Cosmere universe was, which I know obviously other people would, but I didn't feel like I was missing context on it either. So I will say that I definitely say you don't need to know anything about his universes to listen to this book or to read this book. I loved all of the mechanics of the world that they lived in. Like, the sea that they had was not a sea of water, it was a sea of spores, and I'm not going to get into that because I'm not going to explain that to you, but it was really interesting because it was like a lot of the mechanics of how it worked were based on actual things in our world. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was really neat, and that made it feel a lot more immersive than any other kind of world building that I had read recently. I really enjoyed how, again, there were these things that you kind of like take for granted being part of worlds, and then it would be like, well, you know, on your world they have that, but like you think it's normal because it's on your world. What if you're the only world that has seas full of water? And I was like, what if? It's like, you are correct. What if we are the only world that has water in our sea, you know? So it's just like interesting. I don't know, like these little things that I thought, I thought was so funny. It made it so much more immersive. I really, really, really enjoyed the world building, and I never felt like there was a point at which I was like, oh, I don't understand how this thing exists because no one told me that it exists or how it works, you know? Like, there was always an answer to like every single question that you had about the universe, which I really like. If you haven't guessed, again, highly, highly, highly recommend this book. This was my favorite book of the month. It was so, so good. It was my first 5-star read in a while as well. So I will highly recommend this book if you're just looking for a really nice, easy fantasy read that's just uplifting and like feel good. This is definitely the book to go for. I adored it. The next book that I read in April was called Carl's Doomsday Scenario by Matt Dinniman. This is the second book of the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and it's been a long time coming for me to read because I read the first one last year and I just didn't pick up the series again until recently. Since this is the second book of the series, I won't go too much into the plot of the book because I don't want to give away any spoilers for the first book in case you haven't read that yet. To not give away spoilers, but to understand that this is the natural progression of a book series, is they are obviously still in the Dungeon Crawler game, which I can give you some more context on that if you haven't read the first book. It's set in this almost like post-apocalyptic world, I would say, technically, even though it doesn't feel that way. There's this one day that every single thing on the planet just like gets sucked into the earth, and so anyone who was in some sort of contraption that had a roof was killed because they were just pulled into the earth's surface. If you were outside on the surface, just like on a street with nothing over you, you were left on the surface. These people who were left on the surface after everything got sucked into the earth had the choice to either try to survive on the barren earth by themselves or enter these dungeons and go down and start a dungeon crawler game, basically, to fight for survival. And so our main character, Carl, and his ex's cat, Donut, Princess Donut, decide to go down into the dungeon and play this dungeon crawler game. The first book basically follows Carl and Donut as they navigate the first 2 levels of the dungeon. Very early in the book, Princess Donut, the cat, gets this like weird little pet biscuit that makes her be able to talk. So she is a talking character. So if that isn't enough to go read the series, I don't know what is. It's a talking cat, guys, come on. The second book follows them once they get to the third level, and it really only focuses on the third level. And so in this level specifically, they're able to change their race and they're able to pick a class. So that's where the book starts, and it's them choosing what they want to do, and then it follows them in this third level and basically trying to beat this level and move on to the next one. The reason that they spend quite a bit of time on the third level too is because this is where they start getting the themed levels. So the first two levels of the dungeon were just like simple, straightforward, kind of like RPG, you know, gameplay. Like this is just how all games work. You just have a dungeon and there's really nothing else to it. But the third level is when you start getting themed levels. So now you have like a whole city, you have NPCs that you can talk to, there are like quests that you can take on. So it's much more like an open world RPG now at this point. And you're kind of going through, you have like these safe rooms, you have these taverns, you have like actual cities that you can like stay in, and you can again talk to NPCs, you can get quests from them. There's just a lot more interaction in the world, and you're not just in this dungeon anymore. So that's why there's just so much that's happening in this on this level, which is why it really just focuses on this one level instead of multiple levels, because this is a themed level. And you do find this out in the first book as well. There's basically a lot more politics to it, because a lot of the storylines that happen in the third level are carried on in, I think it's the fifth level. There are these like characters and these groups that basically continue to exist once you get into the fifth level. Some of the storylines that you would have started or you would have completed on the third level would carry on over into the fifth level, which is why it's important to kind of understand what's happening on this level, because now there's more of like an actual story and more of an actual plot that you have to follow. Again, because this is the second book in a series, I feel like there isn't much that I can really say about it in terms of a review. I think it was a great follow-up to the first book. I just don't know that there was as much happening as the first book in a sense of scene setting and world building. Like I really enjoyed obviously like the RPG side of it, and I enjoyed them having to explore this open world, which is obviously different from the previous levels. So I did enjoy that aspect of it, and I think that this book was good because it focused more on the NPCs, right? Which again are a bit of a newer introduction to the game. So there's a bit more of a focus on who these NPCs are, kind of like how they came around, and understanding the implications of the game on their lives too, which I thought was really interesting, because I think the biggest thing that pulled me into the first book of the series was the underlying political plot of the world that they were in and this crawl and this dungeon game that they were playing, right? Like there's a lot of politics behind who's running it and who could take it over and who's creating these games and these levels and these mob bosses and all this kind of stuff. So I feel like this book really built on that. Again, now you're actually seeing continuous plot lines, and there are different plot lines that are owned by like different factions and all this kind of stuff. So there's just much more of a leaning into the political subplot of everything that's happening with this corporation that's running the game. And again, I think that it really focused on like the NPCs and painting them as like actual people and not just these non-playable characters, right? They are created for the game, and so you're kind of, I don't know, like there's again, spoiler free. So I just really appreciated the way that this was pulled into the book, and I think that was the best part of this book. But I just don't know that there's much that I can talk about without it being a spoiler. So I enjoyed the characterization of the characters, I enjoyed their continuous development and their arcs that they went through. I enjoyed that there was a little bit more conversation with other crawlers, and I'm excited to see where that goes. And again, I like the development of the game and how you can see how each level is kind of evolving and changing, and I really enjoyed that. So it just leaves me more excited for the follow-up books and for the rest of the series. I would recommend this. If you haven't read the first book, you should definitely read the first book, obviously. But if you haven't gotten into this series yet, it's definitely an interesting series. Okay guys, we're almost there. We're almost at the end. This is the last book that I read. So thank you for making it this far. If you've been enjoying this video so far, go ahead and hit that like button so that I know that it's resonating with audiences and I can continue to make content just like this and feed your hungry souls. If, again, you do like this content, consider hitting that subscribe button, again, so I can make sure that I'm giving you all of this content and you can get it as soon as I put it up. Without further ado, the last book that I read in April was called The New Age of Sexism Sexism by Laura Bates. This is a nonfiction book that focuses on the repercussions of how quickly technology is advancing without any regulations or any sort of ethical considerations of who is using this technology and how. It focuses specifically on the harms that are done against women with things like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, all this sort of technology that is very, very rapidly developing, but literally has like zero regulation over who can access it, how they're accessing it, and what happens when someone misuses this type of technology and harms people with it. Like I said, it focuses specifically on women, and so it focuses on things like the effects of harassment online and how, for example, something like assault in a virtual reality world can feel just as violating as it happening in real life. Obviously, the focus is not to compare and like who has it worse, but there's an aspect of, you know, people thinking that if something happens in virtual reality, it isn't real, and you can very easily kind of distinguish that. But it isn't that easy when you're getting harmed online in the same way that people harm actual women in actual real life. And there's also a sense of the kind of unfiltered access that a lot of men have to virtual reality and to specifically things like AI robots that are made for very specific physical purposes, and how not regulating that and not regulating things like what avatars look like and how people are utilizing this is very, very dangerous and just magnifies the type of harm that is already happening in the real world. There's also an exploration of revenge porn and how that is again just so magnified by things like deepfake technology and again things like AI, where it's really easy to generate images or videos or any sort of false media that portrays people in very vulnerable situations and conditions, and how that can be used to manipulate people or to just shame people, right? And again, the unfiltered access to things like AI make it very, very accessible to literally anybody to be able to do this. And so you have schoolboys making this type of media about their classmates and about their teachers and about people around them. And it focuses on, one, how damaging that can be, but two, how there are almost zero repercussions for people who do this and how they're just kind of let off the hook because there is just no regulation around this, right? There was also a very interesting segment on the access to virtual adult spaces, just access to, one, you know, these spaces where you can have this sort of physical intimacy however you see fit, but two, you kind of get to decide what that person looks like as well. So a lot of times you have men going into these virtual spaces and designing their partners to be young girls or to be part of this very violent fantasy or to be part of this fantasy that kind of borders very harmful behaviors, and how again there's zero regulation on that and like who gets to access this and who is accessing this type of virtual experiences. There are people that are defending men who are doing this, saying that, you know, oh, they should be able to live out their fantasies and they should be able to get it out in this virtual way so that they don't do this in person. But in reality, it's almost like giving them a practice run before they do it in the real world, right? There is no sense of like getting out your fantasies or like working through an attraction that you know you shouldn't have. It's just cementing that that's something that they enjoy, and then it's a slippery slope of, you know, if you do it enough in the virtual world, you get to the point where you feel confident enough to do it in the real world, and then you're really, really harming people, right? And it's very, very dangerous. Defending men and saying boys will be boys and men will be men is extremely harmful, and it's just going to actually make it even more dangerous for women to just live in the world that we live in and that we exist in. So as you can tell, this book was very eye-opening and very interesting. And I think specifically for me, what I really enjoyed about this book was that there were a lot of things that I didn't even realize were actually happening in the world. I am not someone who is in the AI and VR spaces, and so I didn't even know that there was like one of these online adult spaces that are available in Mississauga, and I was like, what do you mean Mississauga? I was like, in Canada? I was like, literally, I can drive there. You know what I mean? I just didn't understand how accessible these places were and how they had already been built in like different places. So I was under the impression that like this is a future, you know what I mean? Like this is something that we'd have to think about as we start building these spaces and as we start giving people access to these things. But I was like, oh, like I'm late to the game. This is already here, right? Like this isn't the future, this is the now. And I think that was a little horrifying. that was a little scary. There is just zero regulation around this stuff. Like people are just releasing anything they want when it comes to specifically AI, but no one's regulating how people are using AI, what AI is allowed to do, and like who has access to be able to specifically creating different types of media and different types of pictures and videos. And I just thought that it was a very, very interesting look into that. And I will say that this book really stressed on the need for ethics when it comes to specifically technology. And I think what was really interesting too, and what was talked about in this book, was this idea of how women are almost never part of the group that creates this or that puts this out, and that creates regulations around it, right? If you have a room full of men and they're like, oh yeah, let's put up this like VR world, and no one thinks about how you could assault a woman in this game, people are just like, oh whoa, I didn't even think it could be used that way. If you had like one woman on that team, she would have probably told you that instantly, right? She'd be like, hey, wait a second, maybe we should think about how we protect women in this game, right? I just thought it was a really interesting insight into this world that feels like you're not a part of, but you are, because it's slowly becoming our everyday world as well. So I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was a very good look into this whole new world for me, and I would highly recommend this to anyone who's interested in how technology developments are magnifying harm towards already vulnerable and marginalized communities in our world. Thanks so much for making it to the end of this video. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope I did justice to the books that I read as well. Again, if you liked this video, go ahead and give it a like so that I know to keep creating this type of content. Hit that subscribe button so you can get all of this content as soon as it's released, and leave a comment below if you've read any of these books. Tell me if you share any of my thoughts on these books, or if you think that I unfairly graded one of these books. Let me know. I love having discussions with people in the comments, so I'd really love to know your opinions on any of these books, or just share what you read in April, or what you're reading right now. Thanks so much for joining, folks, and I will see you next time.